Well, this is a program that I'm a big fan of. I've been involved in it for about 20-some years now, and it allows you to get basically up to about $1 million in funding that you don't have to give up any equity in your company. And it is government funding either through a grant or contract. I'll share the different funding opportunities that are available through it. But a little bit kind of how I got back involved in it is 20-some years ago. I used to run a business incubator in Southern California, and one of our first tenants actually secured some phase 1 funding, was our first tenant in the program. Went on to get what's called this phase 2 award, and I'll share with you a little bit later what the phase 1, phase 2 is. And he was one of our first graduates of the incubator. So I've been fed about 20-some years now. I've seen a lot of small companies actually launch and get started with the funding, and most of the clients I work with are 1, 2, 3, or 4 people. So it's usually small companies that are getting funded through this program. It was created back in the mid-'80s by Congress. And I've also, just share with you a little bit about one of the projects I've gone through myself. I had funding through the National Science Foundation, it's called phase 1 and phase 2 grant, and we were developing a rapid prototyping technology called thick layer object manufacturing, where you can basically take any 3D CAD model and create the object the size of a house. So here you can see we had a 3D model of a Buddha there, and we built this 25-foot tall Buddha. You can see Dr. Thomas, my co-principal investigator, standing down there to kind of get a scale for it. And it was actually out of layers of foam that we cut with a 4-axis wire jet. So you know about wire jets, and a wire jet can definitely cut steel very cleanly as well. In fact, I still have a 40,000 PSI wire jet pump sitting in my garage. Yeah. So this technology, you're probably familiar with regular 3D printing, where you're building up with very thin layers, and you're typically limited to maybe 1 meter in size, and it takes very long to build something because you're using thin layers. Ours, since it's a thick layer, you can actually build very quickly. We were using 1-inch, 2-inch, 3-inch thick layers of material, and we had a 4-axis so we could swivel around and contour the edges. So when we laminated the layers together, recreate the object, and you can do it very quickly with thick layers. There wasn't a huge market for these 25-foot Buddhas, so my idea actually was around applying to the construction industry. So we approached, this was a technology developed by the University of Utah, and they actually patented it, and it was under what's called an STTR grant. And I'm going to share with you the difference between STTR and SBIR in a little bit. But I approached the University of Utah, this Dr. Thomas, who developed the technology, and said, would you be interested in going after a phase 1 grant with the National Science Foundation and applying to the construction industry? And he was excited because he'd been thinking about it. So in our phase 1 project, we actually built a full-scale curved staircase. We worked with a company called Southern Staircase out of Georgia that was building like 1,000 staircases a year. And we said, send us one of your CAD models for one of your staircases, and we'll build you a prototype. So we built it and shipped it out to them in a crate, and flew out there and showed them how we could, basically build this curved staircase in an hour. And then we also did a 1/12 scale model of my house in Green Valley here. And that was under what's called the phase 1 part of the grant. And then phase 2, we actually built a full-scale structure. I'll pass around my phase 1 and phase 2 grant application so you can see what they kind of look like. I'll be talking about what goes into them, but a phase 1 grant is typically 15 pages, depending on the agency. But by the time you have everything in, it actually turns out to be about 50 pages with all the budget and budget narrative and resumes and all that. So this is the phase 1 application. You can see what it might look like. And then a phase 2 is about 100 pages. You have to do a phase 1 report, and then you have to do a 15-page technology plan, and then a 15-page commercialization plan in phase 2. You can see what one of phase 2 looks like. And I'll talk about those phases a little more. You can pass that out. Here's, since there's a hardware group, you can see this is a picture of one of our full-scale structures that we built with the technology. So, yeah.
Are these online?
I can email you a copy of it,
Okay,
PDF, if you want to contact me. I'd be happy to send a copy for it. And feel free to ask me questions as going through. We'd like to make this interactive, so any questions, let me know. The purpose of the program is to really use small businesses to solve some of the problems that the government has. There's 11 agencies that participate, so we're looking to promoting technology innovation for small business. And the purpose is really, I would say, to fund what we call kind of like it's cutting edge type of innovation, so they're looking for something that has some degree of risk to it. A phase 1 grant typically is to demonstrate the feasibility that your innovation or technology can do X, whatever it is. But they want to see there's some risk and you haven't already proven feasibility. So they're not looking to fund straightforward engineering work or software development or app development. So it's something that you still need to demonstrate feasibility. There's some technical questions that you still need to answer with it. It's been around since the mid-'80s. You've probably seen this picture before. They have the Valley of Death and how you get your technology innovation across this chasm here. So in this case, if you have federally funded research that's being done through like SBIR or other funding, how do you get it across this chasm over to the commercialization side of it? And the funding I'm going to share with you tonight will help you get maybe part of the way across, at least, to get some funding. And it's money that you don't have to pay back. It's a grant or contract. And unlike a lot of people come to us looking for funding, like an SBA loan or something we have to qualify for.
Can you touch on the cost share requirements?
Yeah, there is no cost sharing requirement. There's no matching required for SBIR. So that's one of the nice things about it. A lot of grants you have to come up with match for it, but there's no cost share or match required for this. So they don't score that in there at all. And now, even though the government is funding your research and development, you still retain worldwide patent rights to whatever you're developing. So that's a big advantage for you as a company. They do have some certain situations where if they do need your technology innovation, for example, they could step in, like the government retains some rights, like they have what they call march-in rights. And I could really think of it might be more for the DoD or someone, if there's a national emergency or something, they need your technology, and you fail to commercialize it, and they need it, then they could step in or march in and have someone else commercialize it or develop it if they need it for some national emergency. But I haven't seen any situation where the government's had to come in and take your intellectual property. They also protect someone's data too, so they don't release information that's confidential, other than the abstract typically that gets published with it. That'll get published. The rest of the proposal is kept confidential. So when Congress created the program, they required the agencies to allocate a certain percentage of their extramural budgets to the program. So it's essentially like a set-aside for small business. And the current set-aside is 3.2% of their extramural budget that they set aside for this. So only small businesses can apply for it. So the other 97%, I guess, that's out there would go to like universities or larger companies. So there's other funding out there, but this 3% is just for small businesses to go after. And there's about $3 billion available each year, so it's quite a bit of money in it. And these are the 11 agencies that participate in the program.
Do you expect any of these numbers to change with the new administration?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because they're proposing, for example, EPA budget might go down. If it drops too much, they might drop off. There's a certain threshold where they don't have to participate. So if their budget, if it's eliminated or going down, they could drop out. But then other entities like DoD, right now with the new administration, that could go up even with defense spending. What other entities would be affected? Probably I've heard. Department of Education could be affected potentially, maybe DOE as well. So yeah, some of the agencies' funding may go down. Some of them may go up. It's been fairly stable the last 5-10 years. So I'm kind of concerned too if some of the funding does go away for some of these agencies.
What does ED stand for?
Department of Education. So that's one of the smaller ones. So DoD, Department of Defense, Health and Human Services, so that would be National Institutes of Health, NASA, Department of Energy, National Science Foundation, Department of Homeland Security is one of the newer ones, USDA, Department of Agriculture, Department of Commerce, Education, and the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, and Department of Transportation. And you see over here it says SBIR, so STTR. Are going to cover those two different programs, but only the top 5 agencies do both programs, so the larger ones, and I'll over that. And then the rest of these only participate in the Small Business Innovation Research Program. And the STTR, it's only maybe 300 or 400 million. I think it's a much smaller program. I always like to show this chart, so it's kind of interesting. You have a pie chart of how does that $3 billion get spent or allocated. If you look at DOD has probably the largest chunk, almost half, and then Health and Human Services or NIH has a little over a quarter. And then that last quarter is all the other agencies, so NSF, NASA, and the small ones down there like Department of Education, EPA would be down there too. So between DOD and NIH, you're looking, over 3/4 of the pie basically, for dollar-wise anyway, the way it goes out. The other thing I like to point on this chart, you see how green and blue and dropped off the bottom of the slide here. You can't really see it, but green is for grants, and then blue is for what they call contracting agencies. So there's granting agencies, and there's contracting agencies. So the blue ones are what we call contracting agencies, like Department of Defense and NASA. And the main difference between the two, I mean, it's both money you don't have to pay back, but they use different, paperwork for a grant versus a contract. The main difference is contract agencies, they have very specific problems they're trying to solve. So, DOD has something they need for some new weapon system or whatever. So they propose the problem, you propose the solution. So they give you very specific specifications. If it's a new battery or fuel cell or whatever for a soldier in the field, they'll tell you the power requirements, the weight requirements, the temperature range that's to operate in, the cycles, all that. They'll tell you exactly what they want you to do with the money for phase one, whether it's develop a prototype. So you have to follow their specifications and solve their problem. So they propose a problem, so you propose a solution. The granting agencies, on the other hand, have much broader topics, like National Science Foundation, NIH. NIH does some contracts too. You look at their topics are around energy or manufacturing or IT. So in that case, you propose both the problem and the solution. So that's kind of the key difference between the two. One of the, advantages of working with the contracting agencies is they can become what's called your phase 3 commercialization partner. So if you happen to solve their problem, you can become the sole source provider for that solution for them. Whereas NSF or NIH, they're not going to buy anything from you. So they'll fund the research, but they're not going to actually end up being your customer or buying anything. So that's something to keep in mind when you look at the agencies, the granting versus the contracting agencies. So we'll talk a little bit about to be eligible to participate. So I mentioned it's set aside for small businesses. So you have to be a for-profit small business, and they use the SBA's definition of a small business, which is 500 employees. So everybody fall into that here? Yeah. 500 is the even if 100 employees, that's still 99% of the businesses in California fall underneath that. In reality, all the clients I work with are probably 5 or fewer employees, and the most are 10, not more than 20 employees. I would say brought out to smaller companies. The other thing is you have to be 50% owned by a U.S. citizen or permanent resident alien. So that could be, we've had some clients have some challenges. You have to structure your corporation LLC properly so you can show that 51% ownership. So that's something to keep in mind if you are applying for it. They also, with the reauthorization, there was an issue of whether having a venture capital firm have the ownership, whether that would disqualify you as a small business. With the reauthorization, they do allow that as long as you don't have a single investor that has more than 50% ownership. Another requirement is the R&D typically has to be done here in the U.S. It's federally funded dollars. They want to see you do the work here. Ideally, they see you being manufactured here in the U.S. as well. There's a few exceptions to the rule. If you can show that the R&D effort can only be done somewhere else, then you could get a waiver from the agency. I had one client up in Vallejo I was working with too that they were doing a heart medication that was based on the snake venom, and the main research university was down in South America for that, so they were able to get a waiver through the NIH to allow them to do some of the research work. But typically, they want to see it done here in the U.S. For that work. The other questions on the eligibility. The tough ones are usually the ownership, and then sometimes the citizenship, and then the PI issue, trying to find someone to be that principal investigator. This is just a distribution. I mentioned a lot of them are smaller companies, so the majority are that 20 or under employees, and a lot of them are 1 to 10 range. So you see, it's not a rigged program. Small businesses do have a chance to get these. A lot of them are 1/3 third are first-time awardees. That's one of the things I've seen so many companies that start with 1 or 2 people and they go to launch, maybe get 3 or 4 phase 1 awards, a couple phase 2s, and launch their company. So, talk a little bit about the money. How does it get doled out? So how does this $3 billion get doled out? So there's 3 phases. Phase 1 I was talking about, that's what we call kind of the feasibility phase. So it's usually a feasibility study. And depending on the agency, it's usually 6 months. Some of them go up to a year. And each agency varies too about how much money. So anything I say, it always varies by agency. So the smaller ones like EPA, Department of Ed might do $80,000, whereas the bigger ones like NSF now goes up to $225, NIH goes up to $225. It varies between the agencies. And then we'll talk about STTR in a minute, but you can go up to 12 months under STTR. So phase 1 might be to develop a benchtop prototype, or it could be just to create a report. That could be the feasibility study. And after you do phase 1, then you're eligible, you can apply for phase 2, and that's where the real money's at. So that's typically up to, say, $1 million, depending on the agency. NSF is still at $750. NIH, you go up to $1.5 million. And that's usually a 2-year effort, and under that, you're developing maybe a field prototype, so you're testing whatever your innovation is. You're continuing the R&D from phase 1, doing that field work. Phase 3, there's no money there for, at least for the SBIR program. So that's commercialization. So that's where you have to find non-SBIR funding, to find investors, customers, or partners to help you commercialize the technology. And again, some of the agencies like DoD or NASA could be a customer and buy things from you at phase 3. So commercialization, they consider it could be licensing the technology, that's commercialization, selling it, or you could manufacture it, that could all be commercializing the technology. Questions on the phases?
What if you already have a prototype?
Yeah.
Been working on it for a couple of years.
Yeah, that's a good question. You can't, I guess, say already have demonstrated feasibility, so there might be some questions, technical questions you still need to answer.
Sure.
So you might already have a prototype. You might already have a patent. Just because you have a patent doesn't mean you've demonstrated feasibility either. So it's just that they don't want to see the straightforward engineering type work. So it's something that you're having to do some additional R&D work on. A couple of years ago, they reauthorized the program. Like every 3 or 5 years, they have to go through and reauthorize the SBIR funding. And they've made some changes this last time around. A couple of things. I talked about the venture capital ownership. They're more focused on fraud and abuse too, so they had some protections in there. This one on streamlining award process. I didn't mention, big fan of the program as far as you can get this $1 million. Get that much farther down the road, you can give them equity in company. But the downside, the negative, I guess, for this program, it's a government program, and it's how long it takes for them to review these applications. So say the people who are submitting next week for NSF is due June 14th, they won't know for basically 5 to 6 months whether they get funded. So it'll be like end of November, and then they might start the project, say January 1 of next year. So you got this big gap between when you apply and when you get funded. And say they got their phase 1, they start in January, they do a 6-month phase 1, they finish up this time next year, say June 30th, and then they write their phase 2 award in July, submit it, and then they would wait another 6 months. So you got this gap of 6 months between the phase 1 and phase 2. So one of the things they're trying to do with reauthorization is to get that shrunk down as far as how long it takes the agencies to review and make the awards. The contracting agencies are required to do within 90 days. The granting agencies, though, still can go like 6 months before they can do that. In the review process, it's 90 versus 180 days. The granting agencies use external review panels, like NSF, you get 4 people typically. They have to go out and find those, so it takes longer to do that. Same thing with NIH. Whereas the contracting agencies, they use internal review panels, so they can do it much more quickly. In fact, by law, they're required to notify you within 90 days. So since the people are going to be doing it with the DoD, they're working on that problem day in, day out. So they know the problem, so you need to talk with them, communicate with them. I know my brother-in-law and sister-in-law, they work at Eglin Air Force Base in Florida, and they're doing a lot of weapon system work with bombs, from F-16s and I think my sister-in-law was actually working on that Moab bomb that they dropped a while back. So they have to figure out how it releases from the plane and all that. But they do a lot of, what they call them SBIRs if you do DOD instead of SBIR, they use the term SBIR instead, but they're civil service engineers. So they're the ones that are reviewing these. So it might be a civil service engineer alongside an Air Force engineer. When I worked for TRW, I used to be we had three of us. We had a civil service person, an Air Force person, and then TRW when we were working on the ballistic missile program. So it was usually 3 different people working on that. But they're all internal folks. They made some changes where you can switch between SBIR and STTR, and I'll explain those programs in a minute. And you can also switch agencies. So you can actually start your phase 1, say at NSF, and then you go to Department of Energy for your phase 2, which was kind of unique. I haven't seen that happen yet. But they actually try to align their topics between like NSF and DOE, so that it is possible to move between agencies. It used to be you had to be invited for phase 2, like particularly with the DOD, but now if you do a phase 1, you're eligible to submit a phase 2 application. One question I get a lot too is, can you go straight to phase 2? You have to go through phase 1. It used to be you had to go through phase 1 first before you go to phase 2. Your authorization 2 years ago, there's 3 agencies, NIH, DOE, and DOD allows you to go straight to phase 2. So you have to have already demonstrated that you have done that feasibility analysis in phase 1, basically. I think some of this might be going away. I'm looking at today at the NIH, when you go to the direct to phase 2, it says the congressional authorization is expired. So I need to check that they might have expired. I don't know if there's a dollar limit, or percentage, or a time limit. So check on that stuff. It's interesting that the NIH one sounds like it might have expired. Any questions on this slide? So I mentioned odds being funded. Overall, it's about 1 out of 10 to 1 out of 12 phase 1s get funded. And then once you have a phase 1 award, then 1 out of 2 to 1 out of 3 phase 2s get funded. But the competition is a lot different because you're competing against people who already get that phase 1 award phase 2. And then phase 3 don't have a lot of statistics, but I've heard numbers like 1 out of 20, which is only 5%, actually make it to commercialization, that's where the program really falls down. And they're trying to work on different commercialization assistance programs, and that's kind of what our goal is to see more people get to that commercialization and actually make it to out of phase 2. So hopefully, working with you guys, we can increase the odds from 1 out of 10 to maybe 1 out of 3 or 1 out of 4 or something. I don't know. Some people just get screened out because they didn't follow the directions. There's a solicitation, it's 50 to 100 pages, and gives you all the instructions. There's 1-inch margins, 10-point type or whatever it is. So you need to follow that just as the first step. So the difference between SBIR, which is Small Business Innovation and Research, and then STTR stands for Small Business Technology Transfer. They're very similar programs. They have phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. The main difference is with SBIR, you as the small business has to do 2/3 of the work, and you can contract out up to 1/3, say to a research university or federal lab, and it's by budget. And the principal investigator has to be primarily employed with the small business. And STTR, in both cases, the grant or contract goes to the small business. At STTR, you're required to do a minimum of 40%, and then you're required to do a minimum of 30% subcontract out to, say, a research institution like UC Berkeley or UC San Francisco or a federal lab. And then that last 30% you can either keep or contract out as well. So that's kind of the key difference between the two. They also have, some of the agencies allow the principal investigator to stay at the agency or the university or federal lab or whatever it might be. NSF doesn't allow that. In either case, SBIR, STTR, it has to be at the company, but some of the other agencies like NIH allow you to have the principal investigator at the research institution. So most of these are going to be research universities, and I suggest even with phase 1 or for SBIR, bring a research institution and just add credibility for both of that. That's the one involved in it. And for the federal, we have a lot of labs in the area here, but there's certain labs that qualify. You need a list of all the labs across the country, like through the Federal Laboratory Consortium. But they have what they call GO-GOs and GO-COs. So GO-GOs are government-owned, government-operated, and GO-COs are government-owned, contractor-operated. So the ones that qualify are the Go codes, so the ones that are, like some of the UCs, I don't know, manage some of the labs or something, so that would be eligible research or lab. Any questions on the STTR? Yeah.
If I contract with the university, usually the university has some sort of overhead.
Yeah,
percentage.
indirect rate, yeah. Like UC Berkeley now, I think it's 56, 57%. I know UC Davis up by me is at least 54%. So they're all that 50, 55% range. So that means if you're contracting out a third, basically you're not getting 30% work, you're going to get 15% work. So that other half goes to the cost of running the university. So keeping the lights on and all that stuff, yeah.
And how about the U.S. government research lab with their?
Yeah, they have what they call CRADAs, Cooperative Research and Development Agreements. I don't know as far as what the indirect rate is. I couldn't answer the top of the bid how that would work. But yeah, there's basically money that has to come off the top for running the institution. So that's something to keep in mind when you are subcontracting. The money goes to you, but you're basically subcontracting to the university or lab.
Right, so you get what's bang for the buck for each dollar.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good question. So now let's kind of shift gears and talk about how you find topics. So that's kind of how the money's allocated. So the first step to do is you can't just submit something on the blue. You have to go find a topic that you can fit under. So as I mentioned earlier, they do solicitations once, twice, 3 times a year depending on the agency. And there's thousands and thousands of topics out there. So you need to go you can do a keyword search at the site SBIR.gov. You can actually search all 11 agencies at one time. Or you can just go to each agency. If you type NSF and SBIR, Google that, it'll come up right to their page. But that's the first step, finding a topic you can fit under. And then the second step is, once you find a topic, you want to contact the topic author or topic monitor or project director, or DOT calls it a TPOC, it's a point of contact. And you want to contact that person. They usually give you the phone number or email at the bottom of the topic. And just explain what you're proposing to do and see if it's a good fit for where they're looking to fund. So get some feedback from them and see if it's the right. They might suggest a different topic or maybe go in a little different direction. And it's particularly important to talk to the contracting agencies, as you need to know if they have a problem that they're trying to solve. So that's what the SBIR website, SBIR.gov website looks like. And you can search what they call open funding topics, and then there's also closed. So open just means that it's the ones currently on the street. So there's usually about a 2-month period where they release a solicitation to when it's due. So that's an open topic. Closed would be something they funded, say, last year or the year before. And I usually suggest searching both. You do whatever keyword search you might be with this. If you typed in fuel cells, you might get 10 hits for open, but then you might get 200 hits for the closed ones. So you can see what they've funded in the past, and the topics don't change too much from one cycle to the next, particularly for the granting agencies. Contracting agencies, they might change, they have a new problem they're trying to solve. But here's, that's where you can search all 11 agencies at one time. Okay, so say you found a topic you can fit under, you talk to the project director, and they say, yeah, sounds like a good idea, encourage you to proceed or whatever. Then, you've got to put together a proposal. So I passed around my phase 1 and phase 2. This is actually the outline for NSF. I mentioned the actual writing is about 15 pages. You have a project summary and then they have a cover sheet and all that they provide you. But then you have to talk about your market opportunity, who's your target market, how big is it, how you plan to go to market, what your innovation is, information about your team, who's the principal investigator. And then the technical discussion, this is kind of the meat of it. This is your R&D plan. That's the who, what, where, when, how you're going to do the research of it. And then along with that, you're going to have your resumes, and then you're going to have the budget, a budget narrative, description of equipment. So you saw my phase 1 is actually right at 50 pages. So once you have all this stuff in there, it's a little more. The actual writing is 15 pages.
It's the pictures and stuff.
Yeah.
The diagrams. Blow it up.
And one thing I say is pictures worth 1,000 words, and I added a few, and that's how I think I was successful the first time around. Some of these proposals I read, it's just all text or all formulas.
Okay.
That's so hard for the reviewer to read. So if you can
They
make
probably
it
get bored too in the end.
yeah, if you can make figures and pictures, because these people are reading these things at late at night, probably if they're an external review panel and stuff. So you want to make it interesting.
Yeah, basically it's a sales pitch to to them too, so you
It's got to
gotta.
tell a story and everything, and it can't be too technical. There might be know something about that particular field, but yeah, we want to make it easy for them to read it. So.
Yeah, an interesting observation, I met with one of the DOE department heads, and she said actually a good strategy is to become actually a reviewer now before you
and learn
apply.
about it.
Because then you're a known entity, you actually go through the process. It's exactly what's happening. I mean, they ship me all stuff and I need to have it in 48 hours.
Yeah.
So that's exactly the point. But then they actually, it helps with the process getting.
Yeah, become a reviewer and you see how it works, and
And that's really easy. I mean, essentially, it's
Yeah.
sending my expertise and
Yeah.
where it fit, and I did a couple of reviews voluntarily, just checked it off.
Yeah, it's a good idea to kind of see the internal work of that work. Yeah.
One of my friends is an IMH grant reviewer.
Uh-huh.
He gave a presentation to CSF on what it's like. It's really, I mean, they really want to do you justice, but yeah, it's overwhelming. And they get to meet one day in a hotel in Washington
Yeah.
DC and basically try to review them all.
Yeah.
And it's really a harrowing process, so
How many do they have to go through?
he's basically got a pile.
Oh, each person goes through one, or is it like a committee?
He's got his track, okay?
Okay.
There's like 14 of them that come and meet in the room, once every 6 months, in Washington DC, you basically go over dozens and dozens of proposals.
Yeah.
And there's all these interactions, like, because the fields are so rarefied and so verticalized, you probably know who those people are, but you cannot contact them outside of the granting process, and then basically it's like a big no-no to do that. You have to report
Yeah, you're not allowed to
and
contact
or anything like that, because a lot of these fields are very narrow, so everybody knows everybody.
Because it's unethical and stuff,
Right, so
right?
the people, they're not supposed to know what people, they're supposed to be a blind review, but it's very, very hard to.
You can't list people you don't want to have review your proposal, so you could potentially give a list of those, but you don't typically know who's even reviewing your proposal.
Right,
They have to keep it all confidential.
Exactly.
This is just for NIH,
colleague that-
similar outline. They call, instead of research objectives, they call them specific aims, so if you, I don't know, for hardware, if you do medical devices or something, NIH is potentially friendly. You do have to address commercialization, and each agency is a little different. And NSF actually, on that 15 pages now, it used to be 1 to 2 pages. They redid their outline. It's actually closer to 3 to 4 pages. It's actually commercialization. They put it up front now. So that is something that's become more important over the years. Originally, it was all R&D, but then a lot of companies were getting 20, 30 phase 1 awards, maybe a couple phase 2s. They never commercialized, so they do look at that success rate. So you're probably familiar with commercialization. You're going to talk about the market, the team, technology, and the funding and revenue. What's your business model, how you make money. Briefly, I mentioned this is government contracting, so you do have to put together a cost proposal budget. You have to break it down into direct costs, which are materials, labor, travel, that type of thing. And then you talk about the indirect costs for universities. You have an indirect cost for your company. Now, small business might have a what's called a federally negotiated indirect rate, like UC Berkeley has. So you have to propose one, and this is one of the big mistakes I see is they under-propose or have too low of an indirect rate. It becomes more important in phase 2, but some of them have what I call a safe harbor rate, like NIH allows you up to 40% of total direct costs. NSF allows you up to 150% of your total labor costs. So as long as you don't go over that number, then they won't require you to justify your indirect rate. Sometimes they call it overhead or G&A, different names for it. And then there's also a fee or profit. They allow you up to 7%. And that can be used for anything. You can't, up here you can't use the direct costs for marketing, patents, manufacturing expenses. The profit you can buy yourself a laptop or use it for patent expenses, whatever you want. Or if you underestimate the direct cost, it gives you a buffer too. So say you put together your 15-page proposal, then you have to submit it. Each one of the agencies, they have different ways of doing it. A lot of them use grants.gov. NSF has a proprietary fast lane system. DOD has one. Then NIH has something separately. And so they all have a different submission process. And it is government contracting, so you have to do these different registrations. You have to incorporate, basically, and you're going to get your tax ID number, EIN number. You have to get a DUNS number. And then you have to register what's called the System for Award Management, SAM. That's basically how they pay you. You put your bank account information. They electronically fund it in there. It's kind of nice. I know when I had my phase 1, it was only $100,000 at the time, but I think I got $70,000 up front on day 1, withheld the $30,000 for the final report. Phase 2 is basically almost a quarter every 6 months, and then they have withheld a little bit for the final report. But the key here is don't wait till the last minute. Those registrations can take some time to get. So you don't want to fill this work in and then the day before find out you don't have the registrations, you can't submit.
You do need a DUNS number, that's required?
Yeah.
Because those are like $1,000 or something, right?
You can get them for free.
Oh, okay.
You have to be careful where you go. Those charge you a done branch rate. If you go to the wrong page, they start trying to say something. You can get it for
I thought,
free.
because I was almost gonna apply for one before, and I could have sworn there was a fee or something to get your business credit score or
Yeah.
something, like to establish
So you have to
it.
have the right link. There's no cost to get one. But then once you have that, then you can apply for these other registrations. This is the review criteria. So look at scientific merit, the importance of the problem, the commercial application, of course, and then your team, particularly the principal investigator. And the budget, they want to know, does the budget match the work plan? You know, do you have too much budget, too little work plan, or the other way around? Too much work plan, too little budget, doesn't make sense for what you're proposing. So this is kind of review criteria.
How do you weight that?
Yeah, they don't give you like a percentage of what goes in there. They say these are the criteria they're going to look at. And so I'm trying to think of some of the agencies that have any weighting criteria. I don't think they do.
I thought in the review there was a weighting.
Some of them might have an actual weighting on it, but I can't think off the top of my head. Has something. We talked a little bit about getting declined. So say you're declined, then you can get feedback from the review panel, and then you could resubmit. So you want to definitely they're required to give you that feedback. The problem a lot of times is, you know, it's external review panel. You're not guaranteed to get the same review panel next time around. So what I usually say, if there's 4 panelists and they all have one comment that's in common, you definitely need to address that. Now, if just one of the people has one comment, maybe you can ignore that. Some of them are more focused on commercialization, some more on technology. So that's, you have to look at the, you know, that comment could be a completely different set of people the second time around. So feedback. And you know, when putting these together, like I said, it has to tell a story. You want to have as many people as you can reviewing them. This is my last slide. We'll open any other Q&A. I mentioned earlier some of the different funding opportunities, the Phase 1B, Phase 2B. So that's supplemental funding. So once you get an award, it opens up other opportunities. So if you get a Phase 1 award, you're eligible to apply for NSF Phase 1B, which is helps cover that gap of 6 months between Phase 1 and Phase 2. So if you have a third-party investor, they give you a small amount, so like $30,000, to kind of help keep you going in that gap period. And then the Phase 2B, once you have a Phase 2 award, you can apply for that. And NSF will give you up to match up to $1 million, 50 cents on the dollar, so if you have a third-party investor. There's DOD, some of these EPA, they all have these different options for additional funding. The state used to have some matching programs. They had what's called CalTIP, California Technology Investment Program. They would match $150,000 on Phase 2, but that went away. We're trying to convince them to bring some of that back. I know other states like Utah matches. Kentucky does 100% match in Phase 1 and Phase 2s. I'm trying to encourage people to move to Kentucky. So, yeah. So anyway, there's $3 billion available out there, and so the keys I went over, it's got to be some sort of innovative R&D, so not just straightforward engineering, and you got to respond to what the agency need is, and then definitely address commercialization, and then have the right team and that work plan. A lot of, I mentioned the work plan is 5 to 6 pages. That's the part where sometimes you see a 1 to 2 page work plan. You need to have a detail of what you plan to do in your proposal. So it's a good program, and we provide no cost assistance in the way we kind of work by email or phone, you know. And I don't like to you know, don't send me like a proposal 2 days before the due date, the whole thing. I usually like to work with people over a 2-month period, say, you know, do your abstract first maybe or whatever and send it to me, and do your research objectives, send it to me, I can provide comments, and after we kind of refine the research objectives and technical questions, then you do your R&D plan, and I can review that, and then you probably do your budget last, and I can help you structure your budget, and put that indirect rate in and review it. So it kind of works best to do it piece by piece, you know, instead of all.
So when you get a cycle, how many projects are you juggling with your company? How many different proposals are you?
How many different clients?
Yeah.
It's not a whole lot, because I'm just on a few hours a week. I have a full-time position, and I'm just a few hours a week with the Tech Futures Group. So now I always get busy right in June and first week of December with NSF. So I've got 3 or 4 clients that are submitting next week, and then December, same thing, and then I get busy again usually the April 5th, September 5th, and January 5th, which is NIH, so then that's kind of busy periods.
And do you have a geographic area that you cover?
Yeah, we cover all the basically 9-county, we actually cover all the way up to Oregon border, yeah, so it's the whole it's the Northern California SBDC network, so from Santa Cruz up to the Oregon border.
And how many other people like you are there within that area?
I'm the only SBIR guy, so there's not a lot of us that do that type of work.
He's very much into that.
Yes.
The services you're describing through the Tech Futures Group, is that with the clients that you guys work with? Like that's just part one resource that's part available if you're working with the Tech
Yeah,
Futures
so the funding for the SBA, for the regular small business development center might see 400, 500 clients a year, and that could be service, retail, manufacturing. The Tech Futures Group is kind of specialized, so you actually have to apply. So if you go to the website, there's an application, and we see a much smaller, how many clients a year do you see? 40, 50 maybe?
No, over 100.
Over 100, okay. About 100, but it's much smaller than a regular SBDC, might see 400 or 500. But you actually have to apply in our case. And once you're accepted, then you get assigned what's called current residence, is kind of the generalist, and they can then do referral to specialists like me for the assistance.
What's the SBDC?
Yeah, SBDC stands for Small Business Development Center. So there's about 1,000 small business development centers nationwide. So that's the program that we're funded in small business administration.
Have you worked with any companies going to the NSS I-Core program?
Yeah, Jerry's been involved in that, the I-Core program, and actually, it's interesting, once you have your phase 2 award, they actually have a separate funding for phase 2 awardees to go through the I-Core program. So that's something that a lot of SBIR clients do participate in. We also work with them outside of SBIR. You're trying to develop a relationship with them.
Yeah, so I did there's two programs that are very similar. One is ICOR, which is funded by SF. And then there's another one that used to be called LabCorps, it's now called Energy Corps, and it's Department of Energy, DOE. Mostly works with the national labs. ICOR mostly works with the universities. It's a 6-week program, and really what they focus on is finding product market fit. So there's a lot of going to the marketplace, talking to potential customers. It's very intensive.
Yeah, they have a team of 3 or 4 people, and it's kind of based on the business model canvas, and then you have to go out and talk to customers and all that.
Do you recommend it, or I mean?
Oh, I think it's a good process. It's very intensive and time-consuming to go through. I guess
It's very valuable, but it's very valuable.
Right, and so does it increase your chances of your,
I-
grant?
I think it probably increases your chances here, but it certainly increases your chances of success as a business,
Yeah.
regardless of SBIR.
From experience, how much time would you allot for this whole documentation paperwork stuff once you
That's a
get
good
it?
question. I get that question a lot. You could technically write one of these in a week if you had everything pulled together, the writing, but I'd say it's a 1 to 2 month process. Some of the things like putting together the letters of support, that takes time. You can get a letter of support from a potential customer or investor or technology, so you got to get those. Or if you're doing an STTR, you need a cooperative research agreement, so that takes time. So I'd say it's at least a 2-month process. I know when I was putting my phase 1 together, I was working full time, and I was up until midnight, for a couple months, working a couple hours a night on it, putting it together.
Post grant, I mean, once you're in it, and are you have
Yeah.
weekly or monthly report due dates?
Yeah, so there's quarterly, and the reporting isn't very onerous as far as the reporting. It's not too bad. The final report is a lot of work, but the regular reporting, they want to know how much money you spend each quarter, what your milestones are. You have a Gantt chart that you work off of. And in my case, I was a PI. I had to drop down to 49% of my, I was the small business development director at the time. But the more work is up front, putting the proposal together.
Oh, okay.
So it is a lot of work put together.
Oh, interesting.
Did I scare you off with it?
No, I went through this once. No, I mean, there's always time and money is very limited, right? So
You have to decide whether-
prototype done, and then having half the time working with all the other
Yeah.
bureaucracies is very
I used to
challenging for little money as it is.
do a class called the business side of SBR and figure out whether it fits with the corporate structure. And then going after money, I used to suggest maybe you do in parallel. You don't just do this for SBR, maybe you go after money in parallel with this.
Yeah. It sounded like you mentioned that it's somewhat typical for companies to do multiple phase ones, or that it's?
No, there's some that have, 4 or 5 phase ones and a couple of phase twos, and, once you have a couple of them going on, then you can employ people full-time. Phase one award, you can fund maybe 2 or 3 people half-time, maybe a principal investigator, or a technician, half-time technician, or engineer, that's about all you can fund, there's not much. But once you get to phase 2, then you can fund people full-time. If you get 3 or 4 plus phase 2, you can fund some permanent staffing.
So as long as you find something that's relevant, just
Yeah.
continue to.
Is there any studies or anything that shows that most of the money goes towards staffing and or labor or?
Yeah, most of it, when you do the budget, actually goes towards the labor part of it. Because you have your labor, the benefits, and then you have to do maybe travel to Washington DC. And then in phase 1, you might have some supplies. They don't like you to fund equipment typically in phase 1. Phase 2, you can usually fund equipment. Like in my case, you have to show it's specialized equipment you need. Like they expect you to have your own computers or laptops, that type of thing. But like the water jet, I needed a 4-axis table and a water jet, so I had bought a 3-axis router and then a $40,000 water jet pump. So I funded that from phase 2 of my grants.
Once you do get the grant, how frequently do you need to report back to these agencies?
Yeah, so it's a quarterly report you put together, and with both your budget and then your milestones, kind of where you're at, and then you do a final report. So it's not too bad. You do have to set up a government-approved accounting system. They have what they call DFAS and DCAA, the Defense Contracting Association, whatever it stands for. So you have to have it set up to do tracking of your indirect pools. And you can use QuickBooks if you have the right chart of accounts, but it's a little more work for like the accountants side of things.
Where do you find that modeling, the financial performance modeling, is that public?
Yeah, there's a couple of companies that I can give you guys a list, but they have templates that are built that have the correct, basically chart of accounts that allows you to do the indirect pools, and then you have to copy your indirect rates, say quarterly, pull that together. But, and you have to do timesheets. It's, particularly when you get multiple phase ones, they're going to charge this much for this phase 1, this much for that one, and then phase 2. So you have to have timesheets that are signed showing the hours that everybody worked with them. So that's a little bit of a pain doing all that too. All right. I encourage you guys to take a look at it. If you're interested, get in touch with us and see if we can help you out.
Thanks, Chuck.